Yeah, we're live. We're live. I think I missed there just a little bit. We're going back to the old format. I just want to see which one you guys like better. Did you like having the way I was doing it before with, Dino data or something else up on the screen along with me? A lot of times people don't need to look at me this big. I can make myself smaller and put something more informative up there, like a dino graph that we can talk about when we're talking about stuff. We've got a lot of cool stuff to talk about tonight. Right now, I'm almost finished with the video on the turbo upgrades that we did on the 3800. So I'm really excited about it. For one, it's a turbo, and anytime you add a turbo to anything, it's just like nothing but awesome. But also, as much as I love going through all the steps and showing all the things, okay, step by step, here's what happened when we did this one and we did the cam upgrade versus the stock one. Hey, everybody's in the house. We did the stock cam, and then we did the comp cam, and then we did the NIC cam, and then we did springs and heads and pulleys and headers and all, and test everything. And that's all really good information. But like I said in this video, sometimes you just want to make power. And unfortunately, the M90, as much as people tell me that guys are making 4 or 5 or 6 or 1200 horsepower, whatever they're making with these M90s, they just don't make power the way that a turbo does. And we'll demonstrate that, because I'm going to also, in addition to this video that I'm doing on the turbo stuff, just adding the turbo to the NA motor, I'm also doing a comparison between the turbo and the blower at the same boost level and at the same power level, and to showing what kind of boost it makes. And really, I'm going to show, and I talked a little bit about this in the turbo video, and that's that the reason that, and this isn't, by the way, for you guys watching, this isn't a good reason to do this, but this is why I did it. So you should learn from the mistakes that I make. The reason that I went up to the power level that I went up to in the turbo video, the reason that I kept turning the boost up, because it's a turbo and you just do that. You just keep turning the boost up. But the reason that I wanted to get to a specific power level was because I wanted to better all of the power numbers that I'd made, the highest power numbers that I'd made previously before we added the turbo. So we'd run the turbo. Previously, the big number was we would run this as a compound setup. So I ran the blower at a low boost, I think with a stock pulley, and then blew through with this turbo setup using the stock exhaust manifolds and a GT45 turbo. So we ran it as a compound. If you guys haven't seen that video is up. So we ran a compound turbo blowing into the blower. And it made pretty good power. In fact, up until we ran the nitrous setup, I think it was the highest number that we had made. Later on, after a bunch more testing, we'd run the ported heads and cams and different things, and the Gen 5 blower and the pulley. We had a 3-inch pulley on it, I think, and we ran nitrous on it. So I ran a 52 jet nitrous, which we tend to make somewhere near 125 horsepower with. I ran that on the blower, and we ended up making more than that. But then that became the high water mark for this L67 supercharged combination. So adding nitrous to the blower pushed the power up fairly high. So when I was doing the turbo, I'm running the turbo, and I'm running it like everybody does. Okay, we'll start off like we're running on the gate. We're running at 7 pounds, and it made good power. And I'm like, man, this thing is really responding. And then so you go up. I call them clicks. That's what I call when I'm tuning, and that's what I call when I'm doing the wastegate control, because we used a manual controller. And in this turbo video, you're going to see a data log of the boost curve, so you guys can judge for yourself whether or not this thing was effective. Personally, I think it did an excellent job. So we used this hokey manual controller, and it worked very well. And I just started raising the boost up 2 turns. And so with each 2 turns, it added kind of a certain amount of boost. And we would go up from, 7 to 9 to 11 to, yada, 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 go up and up and up. And we'd go more and more boost, and it would make more and more power. And so as I started going up, I started thinking, this thing is making really good power. And so what I want to do now is I want to exceed, first of all, the goal was, okay, I need to beat what we made with the compound setup. So that would be important. So we'll beat the compound setup. And then we want to beat after I did that, I'm like, okay, this is cool. This is working out really well. Now I would like to beat the number that we made with the blower turned up and nitrous. That's a lot of power. But I wanted to do that. I wanted to exceed that. And then the other side of me, like, you have the little devil on your shoulder, and then you have the little angel on your shoulder. The devil's like, yeah, turn the boost up. And the angel's going, dude, there's no ring gap. You have a stock head gaskets on there. This is a junkyard motor. You shouldn't get greedy right now. Later on, there's plenty of time to get greedy, because then both of them get together and go, oh yeah, let's turn the boost up. But I had one telling me, look, you don't need to go crazy with this. And so without having ring gap in it and having a stock head bolts and the stock head gaskets and probably the wrong cam. And I need a better set of heads. And I sent Eric a message today about sending him the heads out and got the address so I can get that stuff shipped out. But without doing that stuff, that's when we'll start turning the boost up, like up, to where like all of it up kind of thing. So I decided, okay, well, I'm going to be reasonable. The one on this shoulder say, yeah, Richard, be reasonable. The other's like, forget about reasonable, just turn it up. But so I decided we're going to go for more power than the blower and the nitrous made. And so that's what determined how far I was going to turn it up. And that's how far I turned it up. And it all worked out. And the motor seems happy. And, it made good power, sounded great. It was finally like making power. And it was nice to be able to turn the boost up and have it respond in kind of a like amount for each pound of boost that we made. We have and I didn't include this in the video. Now that I think about it, I probably need to do that. I need to at least mention it. The charge temperature too was excellent in this with the turbo stuff. Is obviously even better than what the blower was, because the blower started out much higher, especially if you idled it for any period of time. The nice thing about the turbo is it's not really heating the air up while the thing's idling. The blower kind of is, even with the bypass valve. Even with the bypass valve, it still is kind of recirculating some hot air. So it's not nearly as good as the turbo. And we had a really big intercooler on this, the ProCharger intercooler we've used on 1,000 horsepower stuff. So it's kind of oversized for what we're doing here. But it all worked out very well. And it was, like I said, it was nice that we didn't start out at a really high NA power level, but it was nice to get, okay, look, now we're starting to make power, because you're not subtracting the parasitic loss associated with driving the blower from the gain that you would get at that boost level. And then also the gain that you get at that boost level isn't nearly as much as you get when you're with the turbo. But we're going to go over all that when we do the comparison between the blower and the turbo. But anyway, the turbo stuff is working good, and it's looking like it's going to be fairly easy to reach a fairly high power level. And again, all I did was I replaced the turbo exhaust. I replaced that tubular header exhaust with the stock exhaust, mostly because it would position the turbo at a high enough level that the drain would be good. That's kind of all I cared about. I knew that the exhaust flowed well enough in this. After testing these headers, I'm convinced that the stock exhaust manifold is a lot better than people think it is. And I'm certain that stock exhaust manifold, that stock setup would make 1,000 horsepower. I'm 100% convinced of that. And so I may do it just to show that, not that a dedicated turbo system isn't good and it would work, but the stock exhaust manifold, you can make a turbo setup out of it, as long as it fits. It might not package as well as you would want it to. And you might want, like when we did the turbo setup on the front wheel drive Grand Am with the 3.1 or 3.4 liter, we packaged it over to where the Y pipe is. We just capped the back exhaust because it was the same kind of thing as the 3800. They just merged over and then they both exited out. So we just capped that and then made a Y pipe up where the crossover pipe was. And that all worked out really good. So for packaging, that might be a little bit better, but we're just showing that on the dyno, and it can make a lot of power. So we're going to show that, and it's going to be good. I ran 22 pounds on yours with no additional gap. Yeah, you can. I'm all for people like experimenting with whatever boost they want and whatever unopened, because everyone likes to say unopened motors. Do whatever you want, as long as you know that you take responsibility when something doesn't go right. Like I do that. I just ran this and had no idea what it was, and we turned it up and we're making fairly good power. Because the other thing is boost and ring gap are not the relation. It's ring temperature and ring gap are the relation. So there's a correlation between boost and temperature. But if you have a really good intercooler, you don't have a really high charge temperature. You might have more ring gap temperature, but that's a whole technical story that we don't need to get into right now. But everybody wants to know that, like, how much boost can I run? Well, it's not just that. You might only be able to run 7 pounds, but if you do it for 7 or 8 minutes, then you might break it. And that's the thing. People ask me that all the time. Well, how much boost can I get away with this without opening the motor? I don't know. I don't know what your gap is. I don't know what your tune is. I don't know how long you're going to be on the gas. What they want is, oh, Richard told me it was okay. So then when I blew it up, then they can blame me. You don't get to blame me. That's on you. Whatever boost you want to run and whatever ring gap you want to run, that's all on you, dude. So you go out and have fun with it. But I like this V6 now that it's making power. And I think that we're just scratching the surface. If we put good heads on it that are ported properly and the right kind of camshaft and start out with the right NA power, people still seem to have a hard time with that. I get a lot of this from crossover engine. So I test a lot of different things. Although I've been really heavy on the 3800 stuff because that's the motor that I had accessible to me and it was working and it's cooperating and hasn't blown up. I've done a lot of that, but obviously there's a lot of other videos up. But when I get a guy from a 2.2 Dodge or a Hemi or whatever, when they start asking questions, seeing what's going on with another motor like this 3800, well, I've been told that this kind of camshaft doesn't work, and for this reason, this and this and this. And I'm like, look, I'm not going to argue with guys that are cam experts that design camshafts. But what I want to tell you is when you're thinking about it, here's what you should think about. Think about what the motor does NA. Does the camshaft that you're talking about, compared to whatever cam you're talking to it about, whatever one you're comparing it to, whether it's a stock one or some other little camshaft or whatever, does the camshaft that you're putting in there make more power than the camshaft that you're taking out of there? NA. If it does, chances are really good that it's going to work with a turbo. and I get the thing that I get is the same thing that we always get with these turbo things. Well, what about all the overlap? Overlap's bad. We know that overlap is bad. We know that overlap is the enemy. Overlap's not the enemy. Overlap is actually what helps the thing make power. A lot of people don't realize it. They think overlap and then it bleeds boost. No, that's not what happens. For one, this is all happening very fast, so it doesn't actually do that. For the other thing on a turbo deal, and we've been over this many times, that if you have boost pressure on this side and you have back pressure on this side, and the back pressure is higher than the boost pressure, you can't bleed boost out. That's not the way it's going to go. It would go the other way if it did anything. And it's honestly that's not happening that much either. I would be more concerned about diluting the charge than I would be about boost sneaking out. Because if a boost sneaks out, if you lose a pound, the turbo goes, hey, I'm set to provide 10 pounds of boost. If you leaked out a pound, I'm just going to spin faster and I'm going to make 10 pounds. Because you asked me to make 10 pounds and I'm here for you and I'm going to make 10 pounds. That's what it'll do. With a supercharger, that situation is different. You're not going to make 10 pounds because the blower is only going to spin as fast as the blower spins because it's mechanically coupled to the engine. And also on a supercharged combination, you don't have back pressure over on this side, stopping all that boost from leaking out. Now, I'm not saying that the boost doesn't leak out. And if you have an NA cam and it works really well, there's a very, very good chance, like 99% chance that it's going to work on the natural aspirated cam is also going to work under boost. They just do that. And especially in the range that we're talking about, there might be idealized situations, drag racings, whatever, that big, huge power things, Street Outlaws deals or whatever, where a guy wants a dedicated kind of camshaft to make that kind of power. And that's 100% right. And I'm all for it. For what we're doing for these kinds of things, for 1,000 horsepower motors, or whatever, street motors and stuff, you don't have to deal with that. Just put a cam in it and then put boost to it, and both of those things will combine and good things will happen. The camshaft that we ran in the 3800, and you'll see in the video, was not a blower cam. It's not an NA cam. It's not a turbo cam, not a nitrous cam. And yet we ran all of those things with it because it's just a cam. And you can add all of those things to it. Guys think that you have to run a specific nitrous cam. Yeah, it's not. Just make lots of NA. Well, like with nitrous, just make as much NA power as you can. I would run a bigger camshaft than a nitrous motor, not because it's a nitrous cam, but because you're a little more limited in the power that you can produce unless you start stacking kits on it. You're limited in the power that you can produce with nitrous. So make lots of NA power to start out with. And then, like, if you add a 300 shot to a 300 horsepower motor, you get 600. That would be hard to do. But if you add 300 shot to a 400 horsepower or a 500 horsepower NA, all of a sudden you're making a lot more power. So start with more, end with more on nitrous, and the blower stuff and the turbo stuff is kind of the same way. The other question that I'm getting a lot of, and this video is coming up right after the turbo thing, is the comparison between the sloppy Best cam and the Truck NORIS cam. That video is coming out, and I'll show you the direct comparisons between the two. You can see where they made power and where they didn't make power, which one was better here and there and everywhere. And then everybody will get to argue about it, which is awesome. The really cool thing is the video that comes after that, and that's the header video. The header video, because we ran while I was running that cam comparison, and actually it did exactly what I thought it was going to do, given what the duration numbers were. One cam is bigger than the other one. But the cool effect is the comparison between 1 7/8 and 1 3/4 headers, and then different collector extensions, and then what effect those things have on the power curve. Though that is a really cool video, and I suspect will be every bit as popular as the Chuck Norris cam versus the best cam. That will be, judging by what the response was on the live feed stuff. I think that's going to probably do really well in terms of viewership. People have shown that they're already very interested in that. So that will be good stuff. Let's see. That's what's coming up. Those videos are all coming up. So we've got the Chuck Norris cam, the header cam, the blower versus turbo, and then the turbo stuff. So all that stuff those will be the next sequence of videos that are coming out. So lots of good stuff. And then when I go back down, right now I actually have the Dodge 5.9, the Magnum, in my garage, and I'm taking it apart, and then we're going to swap all the pistons back over and put it all back together so it's ready to do a bunch of testing. And while I have it apart, I'm also going to check springs, because I'm going to need to upgrade the springs to put any kind of camshaft in it, because I have a camshaft from UT Awesome, and thank you, he supplied the modified kegger, which was very cool. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but it did, the guys from Engine Masters did a video or did a TV show where we did those modifications, and then we also did some dual plane manifolds and stuff. So it's good stuff on the Magnum. We did it on a different one. We did the piston flip. That TV show's out, I think, already, judging, because I'm sure Tony flipped out about it. But that test was also out, and that show, I think, is also out. I haven't seen it because I don't have a subscription to it. I was on the show, but can't afford the show. so that stuff is out. But I'm going to be doing on this motor. It's just a junkyard motor. I'm going to be running the UT Awesome camshaft, which is a tighter LSA and should be better for low speed power, especially for the kegger manifold, because that thing, even though they've shortened the runners a little bit, not a lot, there's only so much you can do unless you go up and cut those things in half, which I think I kind of would like to try. And then you could see a really big change in runner length, and it would show the same kind of runner length changes that we always see when we do these kinds of tests. But and everybody wants to see the Magnum under boost, which we will do. We don't need to run a ton of boost to show what it does, because the thing is, like right now, this thing makes like 300 horsepower and 400 foot-pounds of torque. I think is what it made when we did the test. So it's very torquey. It's a long runner, tune port style, kegger manifold, if you will. And then modifying it the way that they did, essentially changing the runner length, adding more flow, because they have a really cool 3D printed throttle body, which is definitely helps power, because we know, because we've tested that. But they didn't shorten it a lot, so it's still a fairly long runner manifold, and it still makes, and it extends the power curve out, and it makes more power, and it does lots of good stuff. And then when we add boost to that, we kind of know what's going to happen. It's going to be that shape. It's just everything is going to be better. The cool thing is that big of a motor, plus having the torque, the focus on torque down low, like that long runner manifold would do and does, it's going to be fairly responsive in terms of turbo stuff. The other thing that I'm thinking about, and I want you guys to let me know, one of the tests I've been thinking about is Viren from VS Racing sent me a big turbo. It's a 96 or 102 or 128 or something like that. It's big. And what I was originally going to do with it is on the 4.8, I was going to run that, and then I was going to run the motor NA, put the big turbo on it, show how laggy it is, and then cure the lag with a supercharger. It dawned on me that this would be a better test on the 3800, because it's a smaller motor that makes the turbo, whatever giant size it is, makes the turbo even bigger. And then so we could run it NA and run that big turbo and show how laggy it is, and then put the blower on there and then show how it's not so laggy, or put nitrous on it and show how not laggy it is. All of those kinds of tests are really cool to show the effect. And since we data log all of this stuff, we can show fairly effectively what happens to the boost curve. The turbo is way oversized for anything that we need to do. Even on a big bang, it's way oversized. We need like a 76 or 78 or that kind of thing. And this thing is way bigger than that. But it's just cool to show show the change in boost response when you add a lot more low speed power, essentially. So let's see what you guys got going on. I'll try to answer some questions. The huge turbo is going to make a boost with a lot less back pressure. I don't think we haven't monitored it. I'm sure though, with the 3800, given the NA power and the displacement with the GT45, I would be surprised if we're a whole bunch more than 1-to-1 right now. With a 7875, we may be less than 1-to-1 on this setup. Utah County at 216, 220 from Texas Speed is a good cam on a 112 for drag racing, or for towing 212, 218 on a 112. A 216 is not what I would use for drag racing. A GT45 won't make 1,000 on the 3800. It won't come anywhere near that. Dart Pro and heads or AFRs on a small block Ford. Saw your 700 horsepower combo video today. The 427 was asked. That was a good 427. The AFRs tend to make more power than the Dart Pro ones do. I haven't tested those two specifically for quite a while now, so Dart may have evolved. But historically, the AFRs, if you are in a position where you're maxing out what those heads can do, if either one of those heads can support your power output, then it doesn't matter which one you pick. Pick the one that's in stock or the one that's priced more affordably. But traditionally, the AFRs have been better. The static compression on the 3800, I think, is 8-to-1. Is it on the supercharged motor? I don't think that. I honestly, somebody asked, Corn asked if the GT45 was a twin scroll, and I honestly, now that you mention it, I don't really remember. Maybe the 3800 isn't responsive to heads, cam, or headers NA because it's 8.5-to-1 compression, or the intake is choking it. I don't think that the intake is choking it. The intake, we've already shown, can make a lot more power. And especially when we ran the open throttle body deal, I don't think that that's it. I think we just didn't have the right camshaft in it. And I don't think that the heads that we put on it were indicative of what ported heads can do. Because I've run ported heads on the ported heads don't need compression to help them make power. I mean, it makes more power with compression, but it makes more power in both conditions with compression, because the compression just adds power regardless of the combination. It's not more specific to one or the other. Jack, I was watching a Motor Mythbusters episode called Poor Man's Turbo with a big 98mm turbo on a forged piston 4.8 on 150 horsepower spray and trapping the boost line like infested. So if you ran, basically what they did was pull the reference line to the wastegate. It'd be better off if they just put the reference line to the top of the wastegate, because then back pressure wouldn't open it up. And looking at that motor, I'm pretty sure it would have had a lot of back pressure. Plus it was on fire. But a 98mm turbo is only going to work on a 4.8 if you are going to push that combination to what that turbo will support. That might be a 15 or 1600 horsepower turbo. So do you want that much on a 4.8? And if you do, 150 horse shot will help you spool the thing up, because a 4.8 might not do that very well anyway. And if it does get that thing going, then the 150 shot will definitely help that. Hey, Richard, what do you think about doing a 4-liter single overhead cam from the Explorer? Do you think it would make 1,000 horsepower on the dyno? I don't know. I don't know anything about that motor. I don't think I've ever even seen one in person. David, it's 8.5 to 1 on the L. I'm sure you meant to say L67, 9.5 on the L36. Is the L32 different? Did they change the static compression on the later ones? The audio is better today. Thank you very much. Turbo double over Cam ZX14 drag bike. That's going to be pretty healthy. Cracking heads around exhaust heats at around 400 horsepower. Could increasing exhaust cam duration help get heat out? Yes, possibly. You should look at what your back pressure is and see, and you should be able to take exhaust temperature and pressure readings. That should give you a pretty good idea. And the ZX14 should have, with a turbo, should have no trouble making 400 horsepower. Can the header test apply to small block Fords? Also, like 1 3/4 to 1 7/8, 1 7/8 to 2 inch on the headers for the small block Fords. It can. It might not be exactly the same because the scavenging is going to be different. Because I think the firing order is going to be different also. But yeah, I would think so. I think that I think I've done those header tests on small block Fords. I'd have to go back and look. I know that the collector extension change is definitely going to do that. Richard, your torque arm versus 671 was really interesting. It almost seemed like the torque arm are more torquey than other centrifugals. I don't think that that's the case. I'd have to go back and look at that. I know people. I remember mentioning that the power curve seemed flatter than I remember. I've run the torque storm many times, and it always has a rising boost curve. Gamer boy, can I daily drive a stock bottom end 5.3, make it 750 horsepower? Yes, you can. Just put ring gap in it. JPL, you snuck to the car so you could watch the live feed. The torque storm is probably, I think the most that we've made is 760 or something like that, on a fairly high power output naturally aspirated motor. The torque storm will do that. I think it might go to 800 if you did everything right. No, JPL, you don't thanks for the offer, but you don't need to send your ported heads. We'll have some done. Eric will get them done, and even if he ends up not doing them or they turn out not to be good, which I can't imagine from Eric. I've seen his work. Even if we just had the heads that we have now, we can turn the boost up enough to break something in the motor. Lunar Outlaw, so you got a Toyota Supra with a 1UZ and an M122 swap. No, that's a cool combination. Planning on bringing it to Power Tour and No Name Nationals. I would kind of like to do my Omni and take it on Power Tour or Rocky Mountain or one of those, just to go drive around with all the guys. What size wastegate should I run? 800 horsepower. One of these 45s would work, but even something a little bigger than that would be a good idea. A lot of times guys choose their wastegate based on fitment. So a 45 might be sized so that it fits, but a 55 or 60 or something. I don't know about somebody's asking about the 6870 PTE. I don't think I've ever run that turbo, so I don't know. the thing that I can tell you is for instance, a 76 millimeter China turbo, like the one you get from CX Racing, compared to a 76 millimeter precision turbo that I had, the difference is about 500 horsepower. So a good turbo makes a lot more power. So somebody asked, 700 horsepower non-intercooled 4.8. How long did it last? And was that wheel? Because I thought Torque Storm ran out at 500 wheel or something. No, it was 700 horsepower flywheel, but they'll do a lot more than 500 wheel because we've done more than 700 flywheel, and that's going to be more than 500 wheel horsepower unless you're running it through an automatic and really big tires and that stuff. GTX 3071 turbo, stock rods, turbo has more room. Yeah, that should be a good responsive turbo. Okay, so Corn, the L26 and L36 are both 9.5, and the L67 and 32 are both 8.5. Okay. I think that 4.8 made 700 on E85, right? Did Eric back out when he found that there? I'm sure he wasn't happy about it. But thank you very much, Eric, if you ever watch this. Utah County, the 4.8 didn't go run on anything. It was an engine dyno test. I decided I'm doing a twin charge setup on my 3800 Gen 5 and a Statham with an upgraded turbo. I don't know what Statham is. Is it a Latham? An axial flow supercharger? Those are pretty rare if that's what you have. Aaron, he wants me to guess. What's your educated guess on horsepower and torque on a 5.3 LM7, 10.5 to 1, 706 head long tube, and a torque cam? I think I've tested the torque cam on a 5.3. And so you can look that data up and then just add 3%, and that will tell you what it is, because all you have is more compression than a stock one. So I think a stock one is like 355, and then the torque cam is probably sub 400, I would imagine. So I'm thinking 400-ish, low 400 maybe. If I keep the turbo blower on my 3800, what do you think a perfect size turbo would be with all my bolt-on heads, cam, everything that I'm looking for comes with a 68 millimeter turbo. The GT45, I think, is a 69 millimeter turbo, and that turbo size is fine for the motor, especially with the blower on it. David Vizard, is David Vizard done with your cylinder head? He saw it on his channel. No, all he did was take a port mold of it, and if you look at the port mold, you'll see why they don't work very well. Edward, thank you very much. Hopefully you had no question. You got to throw a question in there, something hard, something I can't answer, which is almost anything. Jack, I have another good question. Is it a good idea to use a diesel turbo, like say from a Cummins, and slap it on a Junkyard 5.7 iForce V8? Oh, okay, cool. Yes, that's fine. It works fine. I would be happy with 500 at the wheel with a twin charge setup. You don't, for 500 at the tire, you don't need to go through all that unless you just think it's cool. A simple turbo setup will easily do that. Edward, you're welcome. Thank you very much. Corsair guy, is it the Corsair the plane? Because that's kind of cool. LM7 5.3 liter. I hope to push 525 horsepower. My ring gap is 14. Should I have gone more? If it's naturally aspirated, that's even a little on the tight side. What's the real difference between a 4150 and a Dominator carb? Everything is bigger on the Dominator compared to the 4150. You can put. We've run whole set turbos from diesels. We've run. I've seen guys do the Power Stroke ones. If it's a turbo and it spins and it'll provide boost, you just need to size it so that it will do the thing that you want it to do. Or if it won't do the thing that you want it to do, you need to put two of them on them. A diesel turbo is not oftentimes ideal for a gas motor because it's designed to make fairly high pressure and usually not a lot of flow, because diesel engines don't make a lot of horsepower normally. They make a lot of torque. So they're making all their power down low. So they're not making a lot of horsepower. They're making a lot of torque. And sometimes they're sized to do that. But two of them work really good. A Precision 7675 will make more power than a VS Racing Turbo 7675. I don't know that that's the case. I know that the test that I did was a CX Racing 76 millimeter turbo, which I don't think it was actually 76 millimeters. That's just what they called it. And then I compared it to a Precision's real 76 millimeter turbo, 7675, but it was a billet wheel, CEA, all of that stuff. So it was it was probably a several $1,000 turbo versus a several $100 turbo. But because everybody calls them 76 millimeters, there was confusion. And I did those tests. I think I did magazine stories. And I think I did videos also. So there's confusion about, oh, look, I can buy this thing that's just as good as this Precision turbo for a couple $100. Well, you can't. You can buy something that is good for 700 horsepower, but it's not good for 1,200 horsepower like the Precision is. The VS Racing, the 78, 75, like the Gen 2 turbo that I have, I know is a 4-digit turbo. JPL, you would be better running less pressure and blower speed from the blower and letting the turbo do the work. Because as you let the turbo do the work, it makes the blower more efficient. As you're pressurizing the blower, you're making it much happier. It will be much more efficient. The charge temperature will be lower. You'll still have plenty of boost because it's going to compound itself, and so the boost pressure still be fairly high. But let the turbo do a lot of the work. Just have the blower there making 7 pounds or something, like we did with the stock pulley. Have it do that and run, and then it'll be there to augment the NA power output and then improve the turbo response. And then the turbo is going to be there to make the power. The Dominator carburetor does have a big flange. It won't go to a regular Holley intake. But the thing is, the new 4150s, the XPs and the earlier HPs, had a Dominator bolt pattern on them, as well as the standard 4150 bolt pattern. So they would actually bolt to a Dominator flanged intake manifold. Can I download my Terminator X tune to a Dominator and have it run fine? I think that those are compatible. I think that the file will obviously don't delete it from one and the other. Just copy it and put it in, and then you can compare them and go, oh yeah, because what I do is, like, when we copy one, I like, okay, this corner was 316 or whatever the number was, and this corner was 15 or what, and then you look at some of the numbers and compare them. You're like, because you have to go line by line. As long as you see, oh yeah, that it did what it's supposed to do, then you'll be fine. What is the oldest engine you know of with aluminum heads? I'm not a vintage guy. A lot of the Mercedes stuff had aluminum heads. I bet the 2.2 ports, the 2.2 turbo heads flow about the same with the molds stuffed in there. Probably. They're really not great. What's the difference between a 5.7-liter I-Force double over cam and the Coyote 5-liter double over cam? The Coyote makes a lot more power, I'm pretty sure. I don't know what the 5.7 is rated at, but since it's a dedicated truck motor, unless you're talking about the Coyote Mustang engine, which is different than the truck engine. But if you are comparing those two, the Coyote is going to make a lot more power, I think. Tony was saying you had an issue with David Vizard in his last live, and that's why he doesn't like you. I don't have any issue with David, and I get along very well because David is realistic and isn't like overly emotional and insecure. That's why David and I get along. We both do actual testing and not the other stuff. And that's why David's doing the head for me. But Tony's really good at creating a scenario, an imaginary scenario, like talking points, and then complaining about those. So he's made like David and Steve Dulcich into this thing that he can then complain about. And apparently the same thing with me now, that I'm this person that does only this, except I'm not. But if he makes a person that, then he can then put them down and complain about them. It's just nonsense. What's your opinion on FST carburetors? I think we've run some of those. They've all worked fairly well when we've run them on the dyno. Matthew, you can look up on the videos and kind of see where that thing is. If you have a cam and a ported blower, a ported lower intake, North Star throttle body, and a 2.8 pulley that's not spinning the blower very fast, better than a 3.0, not as good as a 2.8 on E85. I don't know how well that camshaft works. The ported blower can help you. I'm thinking that's going to be. I'm hoping that would be north of 400 flywheel. Richard, you said before with the port heads on 3800, it did not make any more power. Do you know what you did wrong with the port job? I didn't do the porting, so it wasn't me. When I ported that one port, it actually helped quite a bit. We went from 185 to 207 or 208, and so I thought good things were going to happen. I don't know what they did to not improve upon what I had done already. I'm not a head porter though. How much horsepower should a GT35 make? A GT3582 is like a 500 or 600 horsepower turbo on a smaller motor. It's not something I'd run as a single on an LS V8, but it works really good on Hondas and stuff. Oh, I'm sure it was the porting. I just don't know specifically what they did to the porting to make it not work. I don't know if they ruined the short turn or made the bowl too big. I didn't take any measurements. Should I match throttle size of Weber's to port sizing? A 302 with AFR heads translates to 45 millimeter throttles with stock ports. I wouldn't worry about that. How does a 185 translate to 45 millimeter throttles? Did you do the surface area? I would also flow those to see what is the head flow versus what is the throttle flow. And I'd actually be more concerned about the length of the runner that you're attaching on the intake manifold to the 45 millimeter throttles. Can you run anti-lag in the dyno cell? Richard's port joust is better than other ported heads. It's like I tripped and I had the porting tool in my hand and fell on the heads, and then whatever happened when I fell and turned the thing on, that's what happened. That's how good I am at porting. Have you ever done a 3.4 Chevy out of aluminum? We did some stuff to a 3.4 twin dual cam, if that's the motor that you're talking about. We did porting of the intake manifold. We did a larger throttle body. We did headers on it. I don't think we did cams on it. Gavin, I have an L92 about a Summit Stage 2 turbo cam for it with a Holley Terminator. Do you think it'll lose power from stock or gain considering I've deleted EVT? It's a Stage 2 turbo cam is going to make more power than the stock L92 cam. Might lose some down low because of the VVT, but it should make a lot more top end power and end in the middle, I would think. Corsair, yes, it's naturally aspirated, fast LSX RT intake. That's good. Going to Steve. I don't know who Steve Boulos is. Is it Steve Brule? Is it Westech? In March, not wanting to be embarrassed in his dyno room. There's nothing, you can't be embarrassed about the dyno, just tells you what the motor does. And I can't remember what we were talking about. Australia's in the house. What's your take on LS drop in piston and rod combos? They work good. Just I would make sure that they're balanced. Nick's in the house. What is the No Name Nationals? What's a good size turbo for a 300 Ford for towing? The GT 3076 would be good for towing. Admiral, of those things that you're talking about there, I would pick a V6 Honda. I would pick a J series Honda. Hey, Richard, have you given any thought to testing the Chevy 3.6 liter LLT or LFX anytime soon? I haven't. There's way too much that I'm doing right now to be adding any new motors. I don't have any more room in my storage things. I have to get rid of a bunch of them. Corn, I have some flow bench data on off-the-shelf ZZP aluminum heads. I wonder how your good L67 ported heads might compare. The ones that I have on there don't compare at all. They only flow like 205, so they're not very good. Some of the other ported iron heads I've seen are like 225 to 235, I think, at the peak flow numbers. So send me an email over. I'll put my email address here and show me what I'm curious what those aluminum heads flow. I just want to know if they flow more than good ported iron heads. Or you can post them here in the comments too. That would be interesting if you have that. JPL, you want the twin charge look. I understand that. That is a very good reason to do it the way that you're doing it. Daniel, putting a different cylinder head on a Holden V8, but the new head flows too much for the NA combo. Okay. It loses air velocity. So do you, okay. Will adding a blower make more power compared to the standard head supercharged? Maybe. It depends. It depends if it doesn't pick up power NA, it gaining power under boost. I would be surprised if it does that, and I would be surprised. Does the head can the NA combination not take advantage of what the head has to offer? Does it already have enough cylinder head for that? If it already has enough cylinder head to more than supply the amount of power that it's making NA, and you add a blower to it, I'd be surprised if it does anything. If you take a look at a really good example is an LS3 head. A factory LS3 doesn't need any more cylinder head. It has like 650 horsepower worth of cylinder head on a motor that's rated nowhere near that. So putting more head on that is not a good idea. You need, in fact, it could be argued that you should put a head that is smaller. And I don't think if you put blowers on both of them, I don't think you'd see the gain from the ported head on that combination either. Nick, thank you very much. You've maybe take on an old body style Blazer 5.3 liter build. Watching your channel makes it effortless for a noob to get started and narrow down all the combinations. The one thing that I should be able to tell you is what kind of combination is going to make what kind of power. I can't help you with swaps and wiring and that stuff, but Matt's really good at that. So he's done a lot of that stuff over at Sloppy. He does a good job over there for that kind of stuff. I can tell you what combination will make what kind of power more often than not because I've tested a lot of different ones. Jaw dropping thermostat temperatures 160, 180, 195. What determines the right choice? Well, it's a trade-off. At a higher temperature, you're going to get better fuel mileage. At a lower temperature, you're going to make more power. What is the No Name Nationals, John? So somebody tell me what that is. How much power did you lose with the LS4 intake? A lot. That's the other thing. That video is also coming up. If you pour it in hog out heads NA, you can lose velocity, but boosted not so much. I think that's a way oversimplification of what's going on with cylinder heads. If you make the heads not effective NA, they will also be not effective under boost. Will 8.1 Vortex fuel injectors fit on an LM7? Honestly, I've never even seen what injectors they use on an 8.1. I've seen the 7.4 stuff, the Gen 6 stuff, and that will work. It's a pretty small injector, so there'd be no reason to use it. If you're going to step up an injector size, you want to step up an injector size. Did you already talk about what happened to the Turblone 3800? Well, the compound deal is already up. That video has already been done. The turbo video is coming out tomorrow, so you'll see what happened with running just the turbo on it. If you take a look at the head test that I did, I ran 170s, 195s, 210s, and 225s, and you can kind of see what's going on there. Polyskid, I don't know those camshafts off the top of my head, so I don't know what they are. It would be better if you gave me the duration numbers or something that I could have a better idea. John, the biggest YouTube automotive content creator event ever. So it's bigger than what Cletus does, what Garrett does. Racing, burnout contests, monkey bikes, pure fun. JB, Richard, do you think oil screws are worth it for boosted applications, or will E85 keep pistons cool enough on boosted endurance applications? For endurance applications, I would think about if it's not, if you don't have to redesign the whole motor, piston screws are a good idea for endurance applications. For drag racing, I would, or street cars, I wouldn't use them. I wouldn't be concerned with like upgrading to that. But for endurance motor, I definitely would. We need to see more compound boost stuff. I want to see how different twin charge setups interact. I don't know what there is to see. You run a blower and you add a turbo to it, and then the blower makes more power than the NA combination, so it makes a turbo more responsive, and then so the turbo blows into the blower, and you get a compound effect, and you get a really high boost level that doesn't work as well as just running a turbo. Is it possible to do twin divided housing turbos on LS to spool faster than a divided housing single turbo? I don't think that you would get that. I think that you're still balancing the single turbo versus twin turbo deal, and that's more a function of turbo sizing than it's going to be to get divided housing stuff. I just remember they ran Buick V6s in NASCAR. Yeah, they ran them in the trucks, right? They ran them in the, what were they called? Because they ran like 4.5 liter V6s. I think that was the displacement limit. And they ran it in Busch, actually, before they changed over. They ran the V6s in the Busch Grand National Series. I don't know if Buick was there, but the Chevy and Ford guys definitely were there. There'd be, Admiral, there'd be no reason to compound a centrifugal on anything. I don't know what you would do that to, unless you want to have a centrifugal blow into a roots blower. But it'd be better to do that with a turbo. You don't want to have a turbo blowing into a centrifugal. That just, I don't know that where that would make any sense, other than as a gee whiz kind of thing. Anyone know of good fuel injectors for an LM7? It depends on what you're trying to do. You need to size the injector for the power output that you want. So like 80-pound deck injectors are kind of the go-to for most guys. And those work really well. Buick phase 2 or stage 2. Buick was in Busch 2. Cool. Rolls-Royce Merlins used compound centrifugals. They did have multi-stage supercharging, right? I think I remember reading about that. More importantly, the No Name Nationals is going to be super fun. It sounds like a good time. B-17 bombers use turbos blowing into centrifugals for altitude compensation. All of that's fantastic. I'm just saying, even if they did it back in World War II, I just want to know what the application would be for where we would use that on the street. I just like the fact that like the P-51s had the wartime emergency power knob or whatever, or dial, that would basically just turn the boost all the way up. It would be like full water meth injection and full boost and shut the valve. And it's as if somebody was shooting at you, which that's what they were doing, and you were in a power dive or a climb or wherever you'd be using the extra power. The engine would, they said that the engine would probably blow up if you ran it there for any period of time. But if the trade-off is if the choice is either you do that and you might be okay, or the guy that's shooting at you trying to kill you is going to shoot you, and if it's that kind of choice, then you got to go all in on the boost. They also used nitrous back in World War II a lot too. They tried a whole bunch of different things, but nitrous turned out to be the best combination of power augmentation and storability and volatility and stuff, and weight. Corn, okay, you sent the aluminum head flow data over to my email. Thanks. Are you looking for 429 super Cobra Jet heads or just Cobra Jet heads? At this point, I'd take almost anything, but I'm looking to build a reproduction of a super Cobra Jet would be ideal. Do you have any experience with torque amp electric superchargers? I do not. Yeah, it really is all of it. Yeah, look at the manifold pressures that they're running, and when they're doing the Reno Air Race, those planes and stuff, it's just ludicrous. Lots more RPM than they ever ran in the war. Lots more boost pressure. Lots more power. In fact, they're probably making 2 or 3 times what they were making back then. Detroit 871s had turbos feeding them. They on the 2-stroke stuff they had blowers, because the blower was basically evacuating the crankcase, and then they had turbos feeding them. So Andy, you're saying that they ran at 7.5 hours at wartime emergency power? That's not what the pilots were telling us. Uncle Tony and Andy Wood are racing each other? I like the idea of a torque amp because you can spin it regardless of the engine RPM. That's good to have a electric motor spinning a supercharger, but the problem is that the size of electric motor that you need to spin a supercharger that's going to provide enough flow and power, that's a big electric motor, a really big one to spin any kind of sizable supercharger. What is it they're racing? What is it they're racing for $2,500? They are one pair of a dozen of match races. Okay, cool. How much power is stock LS6 6-liter make with a BTR LS1 LS2 stage 3 NA cam, a Trailblazer Intec 240? Why would you put 241 heads on a 6-liter? I don't know how much the 6.2 injectors flow, and I don't know what that stage 3 NA cam is. I don't know what the specs are, but I'm thinking that should be around 500. Tesla's car, 1,000 horsepower, 0 to 100 kilometers in 2 seconds. Can Chevrolet engines compete with a 1,000 horsepower Tesla car? 0 to 60 in 2 seconds, or 1.8, I think, is the number that they use. That's pretty fast. Two more minutes. Okay, yours will be the last question. It's a big block Chevy question. Do you think a Gen 6 454 will make close to 500 horsepower with original iron heads? Smooth. What's a smooth valve guide? Did you do some porting to it and de-shroud the exhaust? 285, 295 cam. I'm thinking that that's a 230, 240 kind of cam. RPM, air gap, longitude. You're going to need to check that cam to see if you still have the original pistons in that thing. You're going to need to check piston to valve clearance with that camshaft, definitely. So it ran okay on the bench already. I don't think you'll get to 500. I think it'll be more like 450 or 460. Is it safe to up the valve seat pressure on a turbo 3800 over OEM spec? Yeah, you have to. If you put a different camshaft in it, you have to have a lot more spring pressure than stock. Rotary would be a good idea. I would love to run a rotary. Cool, check piston valve clearance. Okay, guys, I got to get going. Thank you all for showing up. Turbo video I'm working on now. That will be out tomorrow. Take a look if you have not. Take a look at the 3800 video that I just put up. That was the comp versus the ZZP cam. I'm really kind of surprised that the bigger ZZP cam at 220, 230 didn't add more power. I really expected it to add more power, but that's why we test. Thank you guys all for showing up. I will see you all tomorrow.